And so I spoke just for a few minutes, but I gave over one of my favorite thoughts, which is a little bit related to the Mishnah, our Mishnah. So we know actually the word Mishnah has the same letters as the word Neshama. We've spoken about it. So in the rabbinic tradition, a person's name represents the essence of the person. In fact, it's one of the few times that the Talmud says that we experience some sort of divine inspiration. If we're in a position to name somebody, there's a certain kind of divine inspiration that a person has in the naming, because the naming actually requires a certain prophetic understanding to get it right. And of course, people change their names, and all of those things are good. So what's interesting is that the word neshama, which means soul and life, vitality. If you heard this last night, I made a little sheet. So this is the Keshet's colors, is the black and the pink. But the word neshama means like desolate, void, empty, barren. It's a super negative word. You don't find it often, but you find it in Tehillim. And you also find it in the prophet Jeremiah. Anyways, it's exactly the same letters in the exact same order as the word neshama, which we're familiar with, meaning life, vitality, right? So how is it that you can have the same letters in the same order, where the only difference is a patach and a kamatz, right? And so what I said was, is that sometimes the difference between a person feeling abandoned and alone and filled with life is just a little support. It's just that little bit that props it up. So, yeah, and I think it's a power, because it's true, right? It's not just cute, it's true. It's true. I'm sure we've said this over before, but the Svarim point out that within rabbinic Judaism, the right is always considered to be the dominant, the more important. When we think about like the mystical, like the God's mercy is on the right, which is more important than the judgment, which is on the left. And the majority of people are right-handed. So the rabbis ask, why then is a person's heart on the right side of on the left side of their body, right? If it's so important, and that's kind of the central thing, you can't live without a heart. I mean, we've met maybe heartless people, but you can't actually live without a heart. So why is it on the left side, not the right side? And one beautiful interpretation is that a person's heart is not for themselves. A person's heart is for the person who's across from them in need of some love. And so it's really actually on the right side of that person. And so it's a function of perspective. So our Mishnah deals also with honor and respect, and with the word chaver, which if you've heard me speak once, you've probably heard twice, that it's the word that I think is the Jewish tradition's word for allies. So we're going to share the screen. And we're up to number 12. Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua Oymar, Yehi kavod talmidcha chaviv alecha keshelcha. That the honor that one gives to their students should be as dear to one as one's own honor, which has the same issues as the verse that says to love a neighbor like you love yourself. Well, if you don't love yourself, then it's problematic. And if a person doesn't feel like they're entitled to honor, that they let people walk all over them, it's also problematic. The honor of your colleague or your friend, or the honor of the person you're trying to be an ally towards, Kemoira Rabcha, should be as revered as your teacher. Which all of this needs an explanation, because the idea of honoring one's teacher is because it's because they are your teacher, right? They have wisdom that they're going to give to you, that it's not just you're giving the basic human dignity to somebody, but you're adding additional value to that which they have to teach you, for that connection to the tradition. So the simple interpretation is that, yes, when it comes to rabbis, teachers, you're going to be on the receiving end of a certain amount of wisdom, and that requires you to afford them the respectable honor for it. But that's not dissimilar from the way in which we're meant to be in partnerships, because partnerships also provide the opportunity for us to learn. It's a different type, it's a different modality, right? It's not a top-down, they're telling, we're receiving, but it's a kind of a horizontal investment. So when we are able to kind of stand up for a friend, then we recognize the value that that friendship provides, right? It's not good to be alone. It's good to have friends. Umayra rabcha, right? So there's a hierarchy. Umayra rabcha k'mayra shemayim. So a person's fear of their teacher should be like the fear of heaven. And the Gemara plays with this. I think it's a Gemara in Psachim. The Gemara says that when should a person fear their rabbis or their teachers? When their rabbis have a fear of heaven, right? Mayra rabcha k'mayra shemayim. Like when the rabbis are fearful of heaven, right? The fact that someone's your teacher doesn't mean that that you're supposed to honor them like heaven, unless they themselves bring you to a higher awareness of heaven. So it's interesting that we're seeing a lot of issues. A lot of time here is spent on the interpersonal, on taking responsibility for our actions, and here it seems to kind of go in a different space, which is to recognize if we don't have the same. So Rabbi Elazar also ben Shemua is a colleague of Rabbi Meir, a student of Rabbi Akiva. And so is kind of also in that transitional time of trying to see what like a post-temple Jewish existence could look like. And so it's interesting to think about the role of community and transmission. So one of the things that's so important in a time where there's not going to be prophecy the same way, there's not going to be the ability to like go to an address to ask questions, the Sanhedrin, all the things that were by the temple, required some replacement. And so one of the ways in which the rabbis respond to this is by taking kind of the holiness of that temple and then kind of shifting it to other places. So one of the places that we find the tremendous emphasis is the Mesorah, is the tradition. Right, and that's how Pirkei Avot starts. Moshe kibul Torah Sinai, right, and Mesarahu Yeshua, he gives it over to Yeshua, all the way down to the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, because that is now going to be the connection back to Mount Sinai. It's going to be the connection back, to God. And so I think part of what's interesting here is that it's not just. Let's say it differently, that it sounds like each person is actually very much empowered to both be on the receiving end and the giving end in a vertical way to their teachers and to their students, but also to recognize the capacity we have in kind of horizontal spaces to be able to, explore what a holy existence looks like. And all of that requires an awareness that it is, that these relationships do provide holiness and as a result are worthy of honor. That's why Kavod Habrius, the honor of just basic humanity, comes from the fact that there's a soul in each person, and that comes from God, and that's holy. And we've spoken a lot about how the rabbis very much saw, even in this chapter, that when we afford people honor, that's just another way of honoring God, because we recognize God as the source of creations when we honor those creations. Okay, I'm curious to hear what people had thoughts on this Mishnah. Yes, please, Susan.
I just wanted to know, I know that in studying Torah frequently, we learned that that we use the term fear, but we could also use the term awe.
That's
and
right.
Just for me, awe sits better because for me, I like to think of a God who I'm in awe of rather than who I'm fearing.
Let me ask an additional question.
Do you know if it does it? Okay, Douglas wants to add it.
She's basically referring mostly to our interpretation. Can you post it again?
Absolutely.
Because you switched the words in the last phrase, the reverence for your teacher and reverence of. You used the words fear instead of reverence, which is the translation in our book, which is fear.
Yeah.
I can one other word, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, like yesterday we pointed out that the word Mora, I think we pointed it out here. Maybe it was more than one day ago. Mora means teacher, right? Maybe it was a different class, right? Like Mora Jane is right, or Mora Emily is just how we say teacher in Hebrew. So it's interesting that the word Mora or Moreh is related to awe, but it's I did use the word fear. When we talk about Mor Shemayim, it's the same thing as like Yirat Shemayim. So Yirat Shemayim is fear of heaven. Heaven is not scary, right? A person ends up in heaven, it's a good place, right? So when we think about the fear of heaven, I think you're right, that awe and perhaps I would say even awareness. Reb Tzadok HaKohen, who dies about 120 years ago of Lublin, explains that the word yira, to see, is related to the word yira, to fear. And I'm sure we've spoken about this. And I do have this fear that like one day I'm gonna have nothing new to say and it'll all be, so at least there's something new each day. That he says that awe of heaven is just a function of being able to see it, being conscious of it, being aware of it. And, I've given the analogy, if you're driving and you see that there's police behind you, so you don't speed because you see that the cop is there. Are you afraid of the cop? I mean, there's good reasons to be feared of cops. I don't know. For white people, it's not so scary. But the idea is that if you're aware of the presence, you pay more attention to your own actions, right? If you want to avoid any sort of conflict. So if a person is aware of God, that means that God is influencing their choices because they are aware of the expectations of God watching them in the moment. Now, is that scary? It's not supposed to be scary. It's supposed to be comforting. God is comforting. God is a lot of things. But hopefully it's inspiring, and awe is appropriate. A person is going to be in conversation with the infinite source of the universe, and it's only because of God's compassion that the world exists. So a healthy person feels a certain amount of reverence to that. It's one of the reasons when we pray, we're not supposed to be doing other things. The truth is, even when we make blessings, we're supposed to be focused, but I'm not particularly good with that. But I try. But right, we're supposed to have, different communities have different, the synagogue is a beautiful place because when we're going to have a conversation with God, we want to create an environment that's conducive for that. We want to honor God with beautiful things. And that's not just in prayer, but it's in commandments in general. We want a pretty challah cover, pretty candlesticks. It's known as a hiddur mitzvah. Hiddur means to beautify. The source of it is actually by the Exodus of Egypt and the splitting the sea. It says Zek Levi Anvehu. This is my God, and I will. The different interpretations what it means. Anivahu, Anvehu means I and God we're going to coexist. And there's one interpretation that means to beautify. There's a beautiful medrash, and I don't think I've said this. It's a beautiful medrash. I haven't written about it, but I want to. The medrash says that once Paro decreed that all of the babies had to be thrown into the Nile, so Miriam and Yocheved acted as midwives, really with great danger to themselves because it was illegal, but they helped and act as midwives to give these kids to help deliver the babies. And then the medrash says that God sent these angels to wash the babies and to straighten them out. It says that they gave them honey, which I think today we say you shouldn't give to infants, but in the times of the medrash that was healthy, and to adorn them with beautiful silk robes and anointed them with oil, really not just gave them what to eat and drink, but really went above and beyond. And so the medrash says that when by the splitting of the sea, those babies recognized God and pointed and said, Zeh Keli, this is that God that took care of me. V'yanvehu, and I want to beautify God now. God was there to protect me and to beautify me. I recognize God and I want to reciprocate. So when we think about our relationship with God, mitzvos become an opportunity for us to invest in ways which are meaningful to God. So we take that seriously and we want to get it right. And there is reverence and awe. And I would say an awareness of the opportunity to be in that kind of intimate, unique relationship with God. And the word fear is probably a really bad word. When we're in whatever relationship we're in our lives, whether it's with friends or intimate relationships, bosses, the fear that we have, if it's healthy, is a fear of taking it for granted, not appreciating it, not being respectful enough, not investing enough. Those are healthy places of like, I want to make sure that the person realizes that like, I appreciate them, that I don't want them to feel diminished. I don't want them to feel neglected. I want to make sure I have some anxiety. I don't want to, not let them know how much I care, I appreciate, right? Those are healthy things in moderation that, right? But more than that, a person should be afraid they're going to live and to work where you're constantly afraid you're going to get fired, to be in a relationship where you're constantly afraid that someone's going to leave you. Those are not healthy places, I don't think. So too, when we think about our relationship with God, there should be a parallel level of fear of falling short, but not one that becomes unhealthy. Yeah, Doug.
But what part of the point is that the translation on the page that we have there uses the word reverence.
Yeah.
Each of those times.
Yeah.
Not awe and not fear, but reverence. Is that a legitimate translation?
Yeah, it's legitimate, and every translation is illegitimate, right? Because it's not the same word, right? Once it's a translation, it's no longer exactly the same. So is it close? Yeah. What's the difference between reverence and awe? I don't know. I don't even know in English what the difference is, right? In other words,
you chose fear.
And I chose fear because that's what the word says to me. When I think about like Moira, it's in my head, it's linked to like, we talk about Mor Shemaim, the fear of heaven. Like in my head, it's linked to Yira Shemaim, the fear of heaven. But there in particular, no one's afraid of like the heavens falling, right? No one's worried that the heaven is going to take vengeance on them, right? Heaven. So I think you're right that reverence might be even a better word than awe, because in my head, and this might be wrong, but reverence in my head feels like it's more connected to actions. Meaning, if like reverence is as a result of the awe, as a result of the right, I'm going to act in a certain way, right? So that is maybe the best word here, right? Reverence. So thank you. Yeah.
So I love the discussion, but it almost seems to me that this is really kind of practical. I mean, because I'm thinking about the middle part about your associate, like the reverence for your master. Now, just as an example for today, there are, you may know that the Psalms class is doing the big read. The big read, the Psalms class. While Rabbi Kleinbaum is away, we're reading through the Psalms. Somebody volunteers to do the Hebrew and somebody volunteers to do the English. And not everybody reads the Hebrew with the same capacity. They're not as fluent in the Hebrew. And you really, and I sit here going, okay, but they're doing a great job. And they've never, the Aleph class is going to read on Monday. And, and since I taught my whole life, I know that when you're working with students, you have to be respectful of them. Otherwise, they sit in the corner and they sulk. And nobody wants somebody who sits in a class who sits and sulks and hates you. And when you're working, and the last one, of course, if we are sitting with you and we're listening to you, we should give you respect, and because we're all here to learn from you, and not sit here and go, yeah, sure, yeah, which nobody does. Nobody does. I've never heard that, and
no,
so
class.
But I'm just saying that it's all kind of practical.
Yeah, it's true, and I think you're right. There are deep practical lessons here, and unfortunately, it's predicated in a person having kind of their own boundaries and understanding of self-worth, right? That the starting point for this is that I'm deserving of honor. If a person doesn't have a great sort of minimum kind of standard of what's acceptable, so then it's really hard to know what then is appropriate for other people, right? I just saw somebody posted something, we all process at different speeds and different depths. And there's always more to process. We're never finished with any of it. But there are people who, when they experience something, they want to take time, not to rebound. They want to take time to really sit with it, to process, to go through. And there's certain people who are like, yeah, whatever. the best way is just to keep going, and you know, I'll go on to the next experience or whatever. And sometimes it's just the same, it becomes a repetition, it becomes a pattern of the same lack of awareness that created the first negative episode, right? If there isn't a place to kind of understand. I used to see this when I was the dean of students of yeshiva in Virginia. We used to get boys sent to us who were not successful in other yeshivas, and we also had local boys. It was a high school and a post-high school program. And like, you know, in the intake says, so how come it didn't work out the last time? Oh, this one had horrible rabbis, this one had horrible food. There was a story for each, right? Why it didn't work out at each place. And then you meet this kid for 5 minutes and you're like, actually, like, you're a really obnoxious kid. My guess is that didn't work out because like nobody wants to be around you because you have no, you know, kind of awareness of self. So, you know, and then like the work became, you know, what can we do to try to help this kid, right? Recognize that like life will continue to reject his behavior and he will continue to deflect it and say, well, they don't understand. It's their problem. They're the ones who need to do work. And he was going to remain. And I think we've all met adults this way, right? Who didn't have people to invest in them along the way. And sometimes life, as we get older, life teaches us through these things because we hear the same thing from more than one person. And then it's like, oh, that's weird. It's weird that everyone should tell me the exact same thing and they're all wrong, right? So, and that's part of life, is that we look to the outside. So that's all to say that one of the things that the Mishnah does here in centering it on, you know, oneself is that it actually assumes that healthy people know what's good for them. One way to understand, and it's tricky. It's very tricky. So last night there was this dinner, right? It's beautiful. I'm really happy it's behind me. It's awkward, taking up more space. It's not like my happy spot. Some people love it. I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do, and they're good friends, and it's great to promote all the work in CVST, and we raised the money for them, all the good things. And there's certain people who can't wait for the next one. Like, okay, that was great, but like, now what, right? I'm relieved that it's over. For other, and I'm not saying this is because it's good for me. I have my own issues. These things are not what drives me. I have other things that drive me that are not healthy, right? There's no shortage. But this, right, and that's the Gemara, the Mishnah says, right, whoever runs away from honor runs after them, and whoever runs towards honor, right, the honor runs away, something like that. That's the Mishnah. And I saw this great interpretation once that that if a person is running away from honor, how is it that there the honor catches up? Where if a person is running towards it, they won't ever catch up. So it fits better in the words, and I'm not doing the justice, but the person, the interpretation was that as a person gets older, they can't run so hard. They can't run so fast. And so then as a person gets older, right, and they're really worthy and deserving of the honors, and then the honor catches up to them. You have all these young people who are trying to get there too quickly, right? And it doesn't work that way. So the point is that for some people, it becomes like a drug or anything else that feels good, and then you want more of it. And for other people, like the awkwardness itself kind of takes away from whatever the you know, the excessiveness of the pleasure. Because who doesn't like nice people saying nice things about you, right? That's healthy. Okay, so the Mishnah says that a person should afford other people honor the way in which it's honorable for them. So part of the work is understanding, okay, so, you know, if a person feels entitled to too much, it's not healthy. If a person doesn't feel entitled to enough, it's also not healthy. So at this Mishnah, it doesn't really give explicit advice, but one of the things that I think is interesting is that it provides other models for it, right? That it gives an opportunity to honor one's teacher. It gives an opportunity to honor one's friend. And in that, there's feedback. Like, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but actually it's landing in a place that's not good, or, you know, the way that you're doing this is actually not okay. So I think that is part of it, that these relationships in the end come to teach and to contribute to themselves. If a person never had a teacher and only had friends, right? In the South is this is one of the ways in which the South, I don't call anybody from my hometown by their first name, because everybody is Mr. and Mrs. and it doesn't make a difference even now, that even if they're younger than I am. It's just in the South, it's just a thing. And here, like, you meet people and like they introduce themselves and they could be 20, 30, 40 years older than you are. And they're like, hey, I'm Billy. Hey, I'm, you know, Willie or whatever. And it's just like Mr., Mrs. And it took me some time. It took me some time. Anyway, some of it's just cultural. But anyways, the point is that I think society does in this way provide some feedback on what's appropriate. And there's a communal responsibility to kind of give back, both to students and to let them know that both they're worthy of honor themselves and the appropriate way to give it. One last thought on this. We said it's in the very beginning of the first chapter. It says vehemidu talmidim harbe, that you should raise up a lot of students. And one of the interpretations that the Tosfos Yom Tov says is hemidu talmidim harbe doesn't mean raise up a lot of students, but it means raise up your students a lot, right? Because if you start speaking to your students like they're a bunch of idiots, right? So then they'll act that way, right? They'll live up to your expectations, and also like that doesn't advance the cause. But if you speak to them like, you're going to be the leaders of the next generation, right? You have to start acting that way. You have to, at some point, you're going to be the people who are in charge. It's really important to start recognizing, that you can be change agents and all the things. So then they start taking that seriously. So anyways, just that's just to say, I love being in this group. You are all inspire me to try harder and to give more honor, to the universe. And I feel very lucky and blessed to be in such great company. And this weekend, I hope that people rest up and take care of themselves. I had to go outside today, and it was cold. And looking forward to seeing everybody, God willing, on Monday. So have a wonderful Shabbos. And one just quick thought. So tomorrow is Trans Day of Remembrance, and there's a new article out that I wrote actually this week with Seth. We have some stuff at CVST, but just one very quick insight. Chapter 26 with Avimelech. So basically, Isaac is there with Rachel, and Isaac is afraid for his life, that if anyone knows that Rebecca is his wife, they're going to kill him. So he says, no, she's my sister, and it's a struggle of identity, of being closeted about who they really are. Avimelech finds out that they're not brother and sister, and in one verse, it goes where he tells the entire community no one's to harm them, that this needs to be a safe space. Anyone who harms them, I'm going to kill them. Like literally, it was a death penalty for not being nice to them. And the very next verse says, and that Isaac was blessed and sowed 100-fold. And that it's an amazing thing when there's proper leadership, people can go from living to fear to being fruitful in just one verse. And so I think it's a powerful message when we think about trying to invest in leadership in the next generation, that we have the capacity to see something, to name it, and to fix it. And when people at the top do that, it happens. The dominant culture can shift very quickly. All right, friends, have a wonderful Shabbos, and I'll see you next week.
You too, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.